Welcome to the Rain or Shine PRF Podcast, where we talk about all things PRF. My name's Ross Bronson. I'm the Ag Risk Consultant with Red Summit Advisors, and Red Summit Advisors is a rangeland and livestock insurance specializing company. And today I'm excited to have Mr. Brad Beck with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of how drought costs can be kind of unseen, and how PRF indemnities can help with that. But first of all, Brad, I'd love for you to give them kind of a good introduction of you and your background.
Yeah. Thanks, Ross. So I'm Brad Beck. I actually currently working for Red Summit Advisors as an account manager. And I am from Utah, born and raised here, fourth generation farm and rancher here. We run a cow-calf operation and farm. We put up some hay, and prior to coming to work here at Red Summit, I worked for Farm Credit for about 10 years as an appraiser there, and covered all of Utah into eastern Nevada, Wyoming, Idaho, a little bit into Colorado and Arizona, doing real estate appraisals for Farm Credit. And I've really enjoyed working there. I mean, I grew up in ag, and obviously where we farm here in Utah, it's pretty hard to have a big enough operation to make a go at it, just farming or ranching full time. So unfortunately, it was kind of one of those deals of you gotta go get a real job to pay the bills, and so then we farm and ranch on the side. But even then, there's a lot of costs involved, kind of getting through the dry times and, trying to get through till you get some of the wetter times when there's good grass. And really for us, the biggest thing that we see, there's obviously the costs last year on our permit. Water was hauled. There's some of those direct costs that you see, but probably where we've seen the biggest impact was it was so hot and dry last year. I mean, even though we had irrigation, our pastures yields, hay yields were way down from where they normally are, and so typically we feed through the winter. We don't have winter range that we can turn out on. We usually have pretty good fall feed. And so last year was a little bit tougher. I mean, the fall feed, just because it was so hot and dry, the fall feed was not nearly as plentiful as it normally is, and kind of put us in a position to need to feed more hay than we would like to. So then you combine that with lower yields than normal, because typically we're able to sell a little bit of hay, bring in some additional income off of just the calf check. And so last year you PRF, those indemnities, the money that came in from those really kind of helps create a buffer of like allowing us to hang on to an extra stack of hay that we normally would have sold, just as a little bit of buffer. And as time went on, turned off real wet, into December, January, and having that extra stack of hay. I mean, we ended up flooding this spring because of all the snow, the runoff, and pastures were underwater. So I mean, this kind of is going to carry into a multiple year event of we had all our pasture underwater, so we didn't have any grass hay that we put up this year. It's coming back. We'll maybe have a little bit of fall feed, but really, from those dry years, those indemnities that come from utilizing PRF, I mean, they're really carrying over, into the future. I mean, especially this year being a wetter year. Yields are better on hay, but we had that event, losing a bunch of grass, to where having those indemnities hanging on to that hay as insurance. Unfortunately, we didn't have to go out and buy hay last year. But then at the same time, there's obviously the the money that could have been brought
Right.
in
Yeah.
from selling that. So, at the end of the day, it kind of ends up washing out.
But the thing that's cool about that, though, and we'll kind of go a little deeper here, is this idea that it enabled some choice.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to sell that hay to pay for something, or you didn't have to buy more. So that's the cool thing about it. And one of the things we were chatting with kind of before we dove in here is this idea of these hidden costs, right? And I think it's really easy to identify the struggles with culling because you don't have rangeland and purchasing hay. But one of the things I appreciate that you touched on is this idea that not only your hay ground, but your pastures weren't producing as much.
Yeah.
And so that's a hit that I think a lot of people don't think about. And in addition to that, I remember when I was running cows in Colorado, we had a situation where we basically had to go on feed 2 months earlier.
Yeah.
And so the feed cost is obvious, like I was saying, but then what about the labor that I had to pay myself or someone else to feed that, the fuel of the tractor and so I think that's kind of the important part of this discussion, is to make sure we consider things deeper than that surface level obvious cost.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because there's definitely, and even, through my time at Farm Credit, going out and visiting these operations, there's been no question, a lot of dry years over the last 5-7 years that, and you start looking at the impact of the subsequent years building up of, one bad year, you start getting a few bad years. You really start thinking about, and it's, irrigated ground, hay ground, pasture. You start depleting that soil moisture over a couple times. Those losses just continue to grow. And that's one thing that, definitely you start looking at some production and some yields that are almost a little bit of a hidden, kind of sneak up on you when all of a sudden I just remember last year, like, kind of you look at the field and it looks good, and you lay it down, all of a sudden you get it in the bell and you're sitting there like,
there's not near as many here as I thought.
Where is it all?
Type
of deal. And that's just a combination of weather, growing conditions, and when you're hot and dry, it can definitely do a number on that.
Yeah, and I think it's also easy to overlook exactly what you're talking about, that long-term impact of not only soil moisture, but if you feel forced to overgraze, that means next year you either need to stay off longer or it's just going to bounce back slower. And so not to be super negative with our message here, but just this idea that the PRF indemnities, I think for a lot of people, enable choice, like we said. And that means that you can then make decisions that are best for your operation, that are best for your ground, and best for your livestock. And so,
no, I agree. It's definitely one of those deals that the more options you have, because at the end of the day, people that are out there running livestock, we all want to be stewards of the land. We're going to do what's best for that cow or sheep or whatever industry we're in, and there's always going to be some tough decisions that need to be made. And like say, having some indemnities coming in from PRF that allow a little bit of choice of, rather than having to try to keep them out there a little bit longer, I now have an option to maybe bring them in and start feeding, because I have a little bit of extra money in the bank that's going to allow that. And not only is that going to probably be better for the livestock, it's going to be better for that pasture, rather than beating it down. And next year you're sitting there thinking, well, if we add more fertilizer or something, maybe it will bounce back, when sometimes that's not always the case.
Right. Yeah. And I think even from a moving forward standpoint too, it also makes us feel more comfortable as producers in establishing maybe more sustainable carrying capacities and some things like that when we're not so worried about maximizing, the production off that land. So I guess kind of to wrap it up here, I think we've had a great discussion. I think it's kind of fun to talk, especially with you, because I know you help with a lot of clients. Maybe what's the kind of the most interesting thing that you've seen somebody do with their indemnities that maybe wouldn't have been your first thought of what to do with them? And I know that's kind of an on-the-spot question.
Yeah. No, that's, definitely probably one thing is just that ability to maybe go find that additional lease, basically allow them the choice to really not have to liquidate.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of these operations have spent so much time
Decades.
and years in genetics
Yeah.
and efficiencies of, the last couple of years have been rough.
Mm-hmm.
And, people were faced with a lot of decisions of like, I'm either going to have to go dry lot these, buy feed, truck them back to the Midwest somewhere where there's some grass.
Right.
And, without this program and without those indemnities, that wouldn't have even been an option that would have been feasible.
Yeah, great. Well, I think you and I both know that PRF's a really big deal for those who have been part of the program, and it's not a fail-safe. You don't necessarily going to get you a bunch of money, but it certainly provides a safety net and an opportunity for risk management in the ranching industry, which is really in some ways a newer discussion in the ranching industry. So I encourage those of you who are coming across this to call us here at Red Summit Advisors. Not only can we discuss how PRF might perform on your operation, but we can also do an analysis of maybe some projected costs that drought can create on your operation so that you can compare those two. So I encourage you to reach out and get some numbers.